In the late 1990s, an iconic book came out and said, "Markets are conversations." That book, written by Rick Levine, Christopher Locke, Doc Searles, and David Weinberger, was called The Clue Train Manifesto, and what they were basically saying was,
hey brands, stop talking at people and start interacting with people. The tools are here that make it easy. It's called the internet. You should give it a try.
Welcome to the internet.
But it was unceremoniously ignored. Now then, the early mid-2000s came along, and more marketing folks, including myself, were joining this movement, launching blogs, joining online communities, gathering online and off to discuss how beneficial it was to have the ability to have the web to build relationships with your customers rather than trying to yell at them from the side of the highway or interrupt their favorite TV show.
Oh, stop yelling at me!
Unfortunately, once again, there was barely a blip on the radar. But then the population grew online, and these things called social networks started to balloon. There were the markets, there were the conversations, and a few visionary organizations and leaders recognized the potential and jumped right in. Many of the big networks we see today didn't even have a place for brands, no pages.
A whole lot of nothing.
Facebook didn't even have a way for brands to participate in until 2007. Back then, it was relatively inexpensive to make an impact. Brands that participated were celebrated for their openness. The commitment was time and energy more than money. Advertising, well, it wasn't really even available. The content was simple and inexpensive too. It was conversational, and the bar on video and other media was really low. Companies like Blendtec with their Will It Blend series, famously thrown together on less than $1,000, could raise awareness, drive sales, and build loyalty with relatively little effort. And these success stories started to attract attention, but it was the wrong kind of attention. Instead of seeing Will It Blend as being this great use of a new medium to entertain and build relationships, agencies started pitching this to their clients as a new, cheap medium where they could get more impressions for their existing TV campaigns. One-way messages that continued to yell at people. So instead of interrupting your customers watching their favorite TV show, hey, great, now you can interrupt your customers watching their favorite YouTube creator. Wow, that's innovative.
I'm not interrupting anything here, am I?
Now that it was seen as a low investment in both time and money, brands started to flock to these platforms to post the same interruptive, hand-wavy, look at me content that they always did. The investment continued to be into things like impressions and reach, but they still didn't see the value in listening, interacting, and conversing. The only listening that they cared about was to the numbers. How did this ad perform? What was my CTR on that campaign? How many impressions did my hashtag get?
Might as well be talking to the wall.
Year after year, more and more money was being poured into pushing ads and messages. More and more companies flocked online to create more and more noise. Quickly, the platforms adjusted, thankfully, on the consumer end and made it harder and more expensive for brands to get heard. But instead of taking this hints, their targeting and metrics got more and more sophisticated. Markets full of conversations, but all the brands could hear were clicks and mentions of their own name. Still, there is little to no investment in the stuff that makes social. I talk to people all the time and brands all the time where I hear, we've run out of time, we need to make numbers. But we told you in the 1990s that this was coming. And then we started to show you in the early 2000s, and then there were new growing platforms that made it even more simple in the mid-2000s. Even when you were throwing dumb money in the wrong direction in the early 2010s, we were there and we were like, hey, why don't you just invest just a little bit of energy, and it didn't even cost you money, into building those relationships so that you don't get into this issue. But each time you always had the same excuse. Well, we don't have any time. You didn't have time 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. You don't have time 6 months ago. You don't have time now. In the future, you're going to say the same thing.
No. Find another time. Later.
Listen, today, it's even harder and more expensive, and it'll take even more time to build those relationships. But tomorrow, it's going to be even harder, and it's going to be even more expensive. Stop trying so hard. The audience isn't impressed by your adorable homemade grassroots-looking videos. There are thousands of their peers doing the same thing online that they would rather watch, because they're not trying to sell them anything. Listen, you can continue to throw more money at interrupting people and competing with the growing number of brands doing the same thing. Or you could take a small chunk of that money and a lot more time and invest it finally into building those relationships.
See, but it's an investment, right?
I know that you think it sounds uncertain and it lacks some sort of solid ROI. My job selling this stuff isn't easy when I'm up against some sort of robot ad servers marketers who can guarantee certain click-through rates and millions of impressions, but those are bogus. You need to stop pouring money into the diminishing returns of interruption marketing. I know what you're spending on Facebook ads alone. It's getting ridiculous. If you would have listened to the Clue Train 20 years ago, or us bloggy marketing types 15 years ago, or even followed the leads of innovative brands 10 years ago, you would be so much further ahead. But I promise it's also not too late. You need to stop undervaluing social and invest in those relationships, because once you do, I guarantee you that we'll never have this conversation again. You will be in front of this camera talking to others. My name is Tara, and this has been Truly Social.